The anointed ones, welcome. The witches believed their coven's unity was unbeatable, a force of unbreakable unity. But what happens when that unity faces a power so resolute that their rituals break down and their spells fall silent? This is not a story of epic battles or armies. It is the tale of how one individual, a one-man army, brought down a whole group of witches, not with magic, but with sheer determination and purpose. The chosen one didn't fight for glory, power, or revenge. They fought because it was necessary. The witches underestimated the power of a single purpose, one so pure that it couldn't be swayed by fear or temptation. A lost child needed to be saved, and that was all that mattered. The witches believed their collective strength made them untouchable, but the chosen one was unmovable. With unwavering focus, they shattered the witches' illusion, revealing their weakness. The true power wasn't in spells or numbers. It was in the strength of one determined heart, fighting not for themselves, but for what was right. And with that, they saved the lost child, ending the witches' reign. And let's face it, they were shaken by more than simply their loss. It was how you ripped through their delusions, showed their frailties, and left them unharmed. Imagine a room full of witches speaking about you, not about evil forces. Because this isn't your typical chosen one narrative, fasten your seatbelt. This is the story of how, in spite of everything, you destroyed their evil universe and the reason they're still too scared to speak your name aloud. A selected one functions differently from the general population. The selected one enters turmoil with a single, unwavering goal, while the others depend on backup plans and group tactics. It's clarity, not arrogance. An awareness that actual strength is found in concentrated purpose while others panic, overthink, or second-guess. You disassembled them for just that reason. The witches fed off the uncertainty of their victims and flourished on turmoil. They were effective in generating uncertainty, conflict, and diversion, but none of it worked against you. They were meant to be strengthened by their group. They thought their togetherness and rituals would overwhelm or frighten. However, they failed to see that an unruly bunch is only noise. They were not as focused as you were. You maintained your composure despite their attempts to instill dread by chanting, symbols, and other theatrical effects. Their problem was their sheer numbers. Their mutual dependence on one another became a source of dependency. They were dispersed, confused, and helpless until you hit them. They believed that fighting an army required an army. They undervalued the significance of a single person's mission. A single person, free from uncertainty and their fear tactics, is much more deadly than any group of people connected by tenuous bonds. You weren't scared, confused, or preoccupied. You were accurate, and like a razor, its accuracy sliced through them. Ultimately, their disorder subsided, not because you were more powerful in the conventional sense, but rather because your insight exposed their weakness. You held your ground as they frantically tried to reorganize. And they realized they were lost in that silence. Their purported togetherness broke like glass, leaving just one person and one goal. It took more than a single fight to defeat that gang of witches. It was about destroying a whole tradition. These weren't lone folks working alone. Like a perverse legacy, they bore the burden of generations of evil knowledge. Every ceremony they performed and every spell they used was based on the work of their predecessors. They stood for more than just themselves. They stood for a whole system of terror and power that had been expanding unfettered for decades, if not centuries. You were up against more than simply their numbers and combined strength when you battled them. They believed they were unbeatable because of their past. Their notion that their heritage made them invincible was what gave them power, not simply their abilities. You were more than simply an opponent to them. You were a disturbance, a danger to the foundations of their life. In the same manner that they had destroyed so many before you, they thought they could use the weight of their history to scare you. However, the reality is that they left behind a house of cards. It was based on terror, secrecy, and the delusion of unending power. You broke the power of their past the instant you refused to submit to it. You destroyed all their ancestors had built by sending shockwaves into the past, not merely defeating them in the here and now. The fact that you didn't play their game made it much more damaging for them. To combat them, you didn't use antiquated scriptures or counterspells. You battled with your unadulterated, unshakable will, which they were unable to foresee. That is the reason for their fear. They saw everything they had been taught to believe fall apart in front of their own eyes, not merely lose a battle. You were the end of their heritage and bloodline. Fear is about the unknown, not simply about power. Because you were strong in the sense that the witches defined power, they were not afraid of you. They couldn't figure you out, which is why they frightened you. They had dedicated their lives to learning dark arts, symbols, and rituals that were intended to influence and forecast the actions of others. However, you disregarded their regulations. In their calculations, you were a blank space, an oddity. They were frightened by it. They anticipated that you would respond in ways that they could control, such as fear, hesitancy, or even heedless violence. That was their method. Control was their lifeblood, and they fed off the feelings they evoked in their victims. However, they were taken aback by your serene, unflinching demeanor as they glanced at you. You remained unfazed by their delusions. You avoided falling for their tricks. The one thing they couldn't have predicted was you. And the most deadly force in their universe is the unexpected. They were more uncomfortable the more they attempted to test you. They didn't get the desired results from their spells. Their attempts at intimidation failed. Their confidence shattered with each unsuccessful effort to shatter you. You revealed the boundaries of their authority rather than just opposing them. You helped them understand that they weren't as unbeatable as they liked to think. What really broke them was that the fact that you used their own dread of the unknown against them was more powerful than just your own might. They had been in charge of the story for a long time. Now it was them who were fumbling in the dark. You became the very thing they couldn't defeat, a force they couldn't comprehend or predict, rather than just defeating them. Master manipulators are witches. They take great pleasure in exposing the underlying anxieties, phobias, and weaknesses that lie underneath the surface of a person's soul and turning them into weapons. Their capacity to convince others of their own frailty is what gives them power, not their spells. They break their adversaries in this way. But when they looked at you, they couldn't find anything to take advantage of. It wasn't because you didn't have flaws or anxieties. Rather, it was because you had previously confronted, defeated, and neutralized them. You weren't someone with weapons or tools. Charms, symbols, and rituals were unnecessary. You became the weapon. The change was internal rather than external. Since there was nothing left to attack, they were unable to harm you. Every effort to enter your soul or mind was met with resistance, forcing them to search for an unattainable angle. It was impossible for them to prepare for this. They were used to combating people who relied on outside forces, such as allies, items, or tactics they could destroy. However, it was already too late when they saw that you were your own strength. They saw no one carrying any tools. They saw the personification of unwavering determination. The change in power was what gave rise to the moniker one-person army, not the numbers. You were the weapon, not the one brandishing a weapon against them. Their illusions were dispelled with each step you made toward them, and their terror increased with each unsuccessful effort to manipulate you. You destroyed their whole strategy for gaining power, not simply defeated them. Neither strategies nor tools were able to vanquish the witches. You beat them. The witches thought that their greatest strength was their combined strength. They were reliant on their rituals, their coven, and the conviction that their oneness made them unbeatable. They created spells in tandem, chanted simultaneously, and gave the impression that they were perfectly coordinated. However, their purported oneness was a crutch rather than a strength. It provided them with a false feeling of security and concealed their own vulnerabilities. You revealed the weakness of that illusion when you stood up to them by yourself. They were unsure of how to operate without the security of their numbers. They were unprepared for a person who could confront them without support, without friends, and without the defenses they believed made them impregnable. Their bravery was maintained by their rituals. However, you demonstrated to them what occurs when that network of reliance is broken. They had been avoiding the fact that their power only functioned when they had each other to rely on, but your presence made them face it. Their fissures showed when you didn't back down. Your disobedience caused their union to fall apart. Their confidence dissolved one by one, for their combined power was never genuine. It served as a buffer against their own anxiety of being alone themselves. The loneliness you made them experience was what made it worse for them. They had lived their whole lives taking advantage of the weaknesses of those who stood alone by projecting loneliness and fear onto others. However, they were the ones who felt it for the first time. Their rituals lost their significance, and the togetherness upon which they relied grew stale. You destroyed their basic basis in addition to defeating their group. You demonstrated the true weakness of their combined might by standing by yourself. The witches thought they had outgrown the idea of mortality. Their dark rituals, prohibited information, and spells all had the same goal: to give the appearance of immortality. They want permanency as much as power. They wanted to think that they were impregnable and that their influence would last forever. However, defeating them did more than just put an end to their rule. It also destroyed the very delusion they had relied on. You didn't win by using force or a clever tactic. Pulling back the veil on their facade was the goal. They had persuaded themselves they were untouchable because of their spells. However, they weren't ready for someone who could remove those phony security levels. They were left spiritually as well as physically vulnerable when their shields failed. They had to confront for the first time the terrible reality they had escaped all their lives. They were mortal like everyone else. This insight struck them more forcefully than any physical attack. The notion that they were immune to time and consequences had been the foundation of their identities. Your triumph destroyed their worldview in addition to defeating their physical selves. Every ritual, incantation, and secret spoken in the shadows was shown to be ineffective against someone who wasn't scared to question them. The loss of their delusion, not only the defeat in the combat, was what really frightened them. They came to understand that death, the thing they believed they had defeated, was always waiting for them, that their strength was limited, and that their immortality was a myth. Not only did your triumph put an end to their dominance, but it also made them face the one reality they had always denied: they were never invincible. The fight was determined long before the first move was made. Fear was the foundation of the witches' whole plan. They projected it, magnified it, and used it as a tool of control. Their preferred weapon was fear, which was more effective than any spell. Most individuals believed in the strength of their delusions, which is why it worked. However, fear only flourishes when the mind believes it to be genuine, and with you, that's where they failed. Their downfall was your unwavering determination. They attacked you with all they had, expertly made illusions to destabilize you, shadows to arouse fear, and whispers to sow doubt. But you stood there, unflinching, without flinching. It was assurance, not arrogance. You deprived them of their most powerful weapon by refusing to give their trickery any power. The witches were at a loss on how to deal with you. They had lived their whole lives taking advantage of other people's weaknesses and snooping on their hesitations. They had nothing left to rely on when those strategies failed. All of a sudden, the psychological fight they had been using to win every battle was no longer relevant. They were afraid that your immunity would reveal their own reliance on them. Not merely that you were impervious to their trickery. They had no authority because they had no fear to control. Additionally, their confidence eroded the longer you remained steadfast. They knew they had already lost, but it was too late. This was a conflict of wills rather than magic or brute force. Yours, too, was impenetrable. The battle was done by the time they realized it. They couldn't control you because you weren't controlled by fear. Before the first strike was even delivered, you completely destroyed their combat strategy, not simply resisted them. The witches lived off of their conceit and the idea that they were untouchable because of their mystery. They concealed themselves behind their numbers, their dark skills, and their meticulously crafted delusions of authority. They relied for years on the notion that no one, much less an individual, would dare oppose them. Your existence seemed absurd to them. One individual against their whole heritage. They believed it was not conceivable. However, it was the beginning of their demise. They were misled by their conceit. They thought that their reputation and overwhelming numbers would be sufficient to destroy you before the conflict ever started, so they undervalued you. They saw you as an annoyance rather than a danger. Their flaw was their overconfidence, which you used to your advantage. You didn't follow their rules or combat them on their terms. The task is done for you by their own feeling of superiority. Their attempts to rely on their mystique always failed. Instead of intimidating you with their symbols and rituals, they revealed how much they depended on theatrics. Their lack of individual power was obvious, but they thought their numbers would overwhelm you. They had established their authority on the presumption that no one could undermine their togetherness, and you dispelled that notion by simply refusing to be intimidated. For them, the irony was crushing. Their cohesiveness, their reputation, and their dark arts, the very qualities that they thought made them unbeatable, turned out to be their weaknesses. You didn't just beat them. You destroyed all they stood for by using their own resources and conceit. They lost everything because of a catastrophic fault in their computation, not merely a mistake. They fell because of what they couldn't see in themselves, not because of what you brought to the battle. The witches were used to using their evil energies, rituals, and incantations to battle. They thought that anybody might be overcome by their spells, that even the hardest minds could be broken by their low-frequency intents. However, they failed to realize that you were on a completely other frequency, so their rituals couldn't affect you. The war was won by your energy field's overwhelming might, not by strength or brutal force. Since your high-frequency resilience was too strong for their low vibrations, every evil intent they sent rebounded off you. They attempted to enchant you and entice you into their manipulative and fear-based universe, but every effort was just defeated by the power of your presence. They used their own energy to nullify their power, since they had no clue how to handle someone who didn't just reject it. You possessed an inner strength that was much more powerful than their spells, trickery, or rituals, so you didn't need to fight back with physical force. Their dark techniques were helpless against the might of your energy. The power of your presence absorbed and dissolved every effort they made to control you and weaken you. You out-vibrated them rather than just out-fighted them in the conventional sense. They were used to forcing their will on others and manipulating people's emotions to suit their requirements. However, you were unique. They couldn't even fathom the power you exuded as you stood there, unflinching. Your energy drove them away in addition to protecting you. You were a living, breathing force field that was impenetrable to their low-frequency vibration. So you weren't only immune to their power. Their ceremonies ultimately succeeded despite their lack of authority. Their energy was much less than yours, which is why they failed. Corrupt practices were a specialty of the witches. By sowing doubt, making false promises, and gradually transforming those who opposed them into puppets, they were skilled at manipulating their adversaries' thoughts. For the majority, the attraction of power or the prospect of survival would eventually cause them to lose themselves. However, they ran against something they couldn't control when they approached you, an unwavering moral compass that served as an unbreakable barrier. They tried to entice you with their might, their pledges of control, and their offers of knowledge that was prohibited. They attempted to sway your beliefs and get you to doubt your course, but they misjudged your strength of character. Because you weren't engaged in their games, you bounded off every method they used, even deceptive manipulation and alluring promises of grandeur. They were unable to overcome your honesty as a weapon. They were unaware that someone who wasn't influenced by self-interest would not be receptive to their typical unscrupulous practices. You already understood how valuable you were, therefore you didn't care about their strength or attractiveness. They were exposed when they tried to use temptation to undermine you. They were used to controlling others and entangling them in their web. But their webs did little good against you. They exposed their own frailty in their frantic efforts to corrupt you. Their ability to influence others into forsaking their own strength was what made them strong, not their magic or numbers. However, you didn't follow their guidelines. They were helpless and exposed by your fortitude in the face of their efforts. They revealed the weakness of their authority in addition to failing to corrupt you. They were nothing if they couldn't shatter you. You defeated them because it was required, not for attention. The witches were used to battling for honor, dominance, or retribution. They were driven by a need to establish their superiority, a desire for respect or personal gain. However, they soon discovered that their typical strategies would not work when they encountered you. You weren't here to get attention. Adding another trophy to your collection or receiving praise were not the reasons you were battling. You weren't defending yourself at all. You had to fight because you had to. Because it was necessary to put an end to their evil power's very existence, and they were frightened by it. They couldn't comprehend how disconnected you were. Manipulation was the foundation of their whole approach. They would entice their adversaries with claims of greatness or use terror to divert their attention from the greater picture. However, you were unconcerned about personal gain, fame, or terror. No one's praise or approval was necessary for you. You were immobile because you behaved out of sheer need. For them, your degree of separation made you very unpredictable. There was no way to haggle with you or divert your attention with deceptive promises or diversions. They were unable to play on your emotions or ego. You have no intention of proving anything. Promises of riches, position, or power didn't influence you. You had a distinct and undivided focus. They had to give up their rule. This was the witch's nightmare. They had always been able to control people by playing on their fears or passions, but you lacked both. They couldn't take advantage of the deeper foundation of your determination. Beating them for the sake of winning wasn't the reason for your success. It has to do with carrying out an unavoidable obligation. Their efforts to manipulate or divert you were destroyed by that degree of steadfast dedication. Not only did your strength beat them, but your unadulterated purpose did as well. Number 12, you made their actual character known to them. The witches deliberately cultivated an image of invincibility that concealed their real nature, spending their lifetimes creating a web of secrecy and dread. They used deception to stay in charge, persuading people, and maybe even themselves, that their authority was unassailable. However, when you opposed them, you did more than merely question their authority. You made them face the reality of their own lives. Lying was the cornerstone of their power, the thing they had worked so hard to master over the years. You removed the masks they had painstakingly created by refusing to be coerced or intimidated. You didn't have to use coercion or force to disclose them. Your presence was all that was required. Your steadfast reluctance to compromise. Every time they sought to influence your view or incite dread, you fought back, and you exposed the hollowness underlying their purported strength with every instance of resistance. They were no longer able to avoid the reality. Their illusionary power was intended to maintain others' terror and submissiveness. It was not genuine. The secrecy, the magic, and the rituals were all a front to give the impression that they were unbeatable. You demonstrated it to them. By opposing them, you forced them to confront their own vulnerability, which was the only thing they could avoid. The fact that this self-disclosure was too late is even more upsetting for them. Only after they had already lost did they learn who they really were. They witnessed the nothingness of their own existence as the illusion disintegrated. Not only did your win undermine their physical might, but it also destroyed their whole self-concept. In addition to losing the fight, they also lost their sense of self, their identity, and their hold on the idea that they were untouchable, which they had fought so hard to defend. 13th, their myths will be outlived by your legacy. Over the course of ages, the witches developed their mythology and shaped themselves into fabled characters with evil might. Their ceremonies were regarded as sacrosanct and untouchable, and their names were spoken in terror. They flourished on the belief that their combined might was unending, inherited from one generation to the next, and became stronger with every new coven member. They wanted to be seen as the ultimate manifestation of evil, an unstoppable force. However, something far more significant than their failure occurred when you stood up to them alone. You really destroyed that mythology. You revealed the truth they had been concealing for so long in a single, decisive move. Not only did you physically beat them, but you also ruined the story that made them interesting. Your unwavering reality caused their myths, those tales of unstoppable witches and evil spirits that controlled without question, to fall apart. You demonstrated that no authority, no matter how old or centralized, is unassailable by opposing them. Unlike them, your legacy will endure. The names of the witches will not be feared by future generations. They will recall how one individual revealed the deceit of collective evil and overthrew the ostensibly unassailable. A tale of resistance that will be recounted and repeated. You become a symbol. A reminder that real strength lies in having the guts to stand up for what it is and not in numbers or rituals. No matter how powerful, no evil force can undo the legacy you have built. You will go down in history as the one who broke the witches' illusions, but they will be forgotten. Not only did you overcome them, but you also became the live example that the stories they created about themselves were untrue, and that one individual with unwavering will could alter the course of history. Ultimately, your triumph was more than simply defeating a gang of witches. It involved destroying all they stood for. You pushed them to face their own frailty, broke their illusions, and revealed their inadequacies. You stood resolutely by yourself, not for attention or glory, but because it was required. You fought with more than just power and guile. You had a firm moral compass that no evil force could sway, and you battled with purpose. In that one instant, you were a live example of the fact that power isn't determined by numbers, spells, or terror, and the collective evil they created fell in your face. It is determined by an individual's strength and integrity. This conflict will leave a lasting memory for you. Your reputation as the one who revealed their deceit will endure, and the myths they produced will eventually disappear. If you remain true to who you are, future generations will talk about you as a force of truth rather than just a victor. You will be a living example of the belief that no opponent is too strong or darkness too deep. The witches thought they would never die. They were mistaken. You have shown that genuine power, which lies in the persistent bravery of one determined person, is timeless. That is an unassailable triumph, a reality that will outlive any sinister fantasy they have ever conjured. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, press the like button, share with your friends, and leave a comment below if you liked this inspiring adventure and would want to see more video that defies convention and explores the exceptional. Please share your thoughts with us. The narrative doesn't finish here, so stay tuned for more. Together, let's continue to push limits.